Hello again, everyone. I've been following news about the state of United Parks and Resorts for a while, and also recently began playing the game Roller Coaster Tycoon again. At one point, I got an idea. These days, United Parks and Resorts is majority owned by a private equity firm named Hillpath Capital. They own more than 50% of the company now and hold 3 seats on the board of directors, including the chairman position, which is held by their founding member, Scott Ross. The control of the company is so dominant that, basically, what they say goes. Eventually, I got an idea. What if I took one of my parks in Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 and began managing it like Hillpath, based on what we've seen on the ground level at United Parks and Resorts? I figured that would be a fascinating experiment. Just before I finished the scenario for Crazy Castle, I paused the game and wrote down as many park stats as I could. Here's what they were. Take a moment to pause if you want to have a look. Mind you, when I run the park the way Hillpath runs United Parks and Resorts, it won't be a one-to-one comparison to real life. In Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, there are some things I can't do. For instance, in RCT2, you can either charge for rides or charge for admission. In Crazy Castle, the park admission is free, which means any change in price will have to be at the rides and stalls. Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 also doesn't have animal exhibits, so I can't replicate that part of the business from, say, SeaWorld or Busch Gardens. Here's one thing I can replicate to a certain extent: theming. There's different theming you can add to the setting around rides to boost their excitement rating. That's why I've put flowers around the Ferris wheel and a couple of other rides. I also put scenery around the putt-putt course when I had one here at Crazy Castle. There's more I can do, but let's get started with this experiment. To establish a set of rules, I asked enthusiasts on X for suggestions. I added some things based on photos and other info I gathered over the past several months. Here are the rules based on what I found out. Max out the debt, boost in-park per capita spending if I can, cut the number of mechanics and handymen to save on labor costs, cut research funding, only use marketing if guest numbers drop, cut landscaping by 80% because that just doesn't make money. Aim for a 4-to-1 margin in food and drink profits. Keep cash reserves high for shareholder value. If a bench is broken, either remove it or wait to replace it. But there are also limits to the Hillpath style that I will be using. Number 1, I have to keep the park value above 600. No, the park rating above 600, my bad. If the park rating falls below 600, that's when you start risking the guest count going into a freefall. This is when all benches and trash cans can get repaired. If guests say they won't pay for something, I will lower the price by 10 cents until they do pay. As I began the experiment the first time, I realized I messed something up and had to start over. So most of the footage you see in the video is of the first time I tried the experiment. But as I conducted the experiment the second time, I got some interesting results I didn't expect. The first thing I did was I paused the game and changed as many things as I could about how the park operates while the game is paused. Since Hillpath Capital has a habit of using one-train operations even on some busy days, I cut the number of cars on my Wild Mouse coasters in half and doubled the interval between departures from the stations. I also cut the number of trains on my Mine Ride from 2 to 1. Not surprisingly, this caused a lot of the guests to start thinking, I've been queuing for this ride for ages. The queue lines were almost always full. Next thing I did was I maxed out the loan the game allows, $35,000. This is the first place where we run into how RCT2 isn't like the real world. In the game, the debt does not mature or come due. Instead, the higher your debt, the higher the interest rate you have to pay, which gets deducted from your cash pile. By maxing out the debt, the interest payment for each month went up to $213. Not much in the grand scheme of things, but it still simulates something that happens in the real world. Because United Parks and Resorts does still have to service its debt and make those interest payments. The next thing I did was raise prices so that 75% of the price was pure profit. This wasn't equally effective across all attractions. For the drink stall, its default price already has that kind of margin. For others, I increased the price a lot. Umbrellas went up to $8, food went up usually to $1.50 or more, depending on the stall. The rides all went up to at least $3. For flat rides, this didn't work out very well, and that's where I ran into a limitation. For flat rides, the $2 range is where you start to hear people say they won't pay for it. So I had to carefully trim the price until they stopped saying that. For tracked rides like roller coasters, it was a bit different. People love the log flume rides, and so I was able to get a pretty high price on that one. A little over $3 per person. The highest I managed to get was the Texas Tubs ride. It's a Virginia Reel style coaster that's very exciting and with a short queue line. I managed to pump the price on that one a little over $4 per person. What's more is I don't remember ever seeing any thoughts about that ride that said, I'm not paying that much. Next step was probably the thing Hillpath became most notorious for when they took over United Parks and Resorts. I cut the staffing. In the beginning, I started with 12 handymen, 6 mechanics, 1 security guard, and 2 entertainers. I cut both the entertainers since they themselves don't make money and I instead pay them. I cut 2 mechanics and cut 4 handymen. I also got rid of the landscaping. In the game, these give the rides an excitement boost but do not themselves make money. And in real life, those kinds of things would get relatively ignored by Hillpath. Some of what I did in this experiment was inspired by the updates I see on an X page called SeaWorld Work Orders. Shout out to that page for keeping a close eye on things over there. Based on what I've seen on that page, if a bench turned out broken, instead of replacing it, I'd just get rid of it. That's because there have been some instances where a railing was breaking or a series of light bulbs over a port of entry were broken, and instead of replacing them, they were simply removed. But once in a while, we also see some things get fixed. So I started randomizing whether I fixed a bench or removed it to try and keep guests from thinking the vandalism was bad. Each year of this experiment, I recorded the spreadsheet in September since that's effectively the end of the summer season in real life. I couldn't get screenshots of it because when I tried that, the game would just quit on me. That's why you save these games as you go. Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 is over 20 years old and can act up on modern systems sometimes. But moving on. The spreadsheet had these numbers on it. We started with a good crowd of 1,751 guests, a park rating of 999, which is the max rating you can have, a cash pile of $39,000 including the $10,000 from the starting loan at the beginning of the scenario. The park value was $224,000, and the company value was over $254,000. But here are some stats that Hillpath would look at since they're a private equity firm. EBITDA was $2,825, for example. There's even more to the story than these spreadsheet numbers. There's the consumer side. What were guests thinking when the experiment began? Well, lucky for you, I recorded the top 10 guest thoughts each time I recorded the spreadsheet. In the beginning, the top 10 thoughts were these. You can see I feel sick is the top thought at 103 people. No surprise since I was trying to get as many people through the coasters as fast as possible, which basically turned the coasters and the thrill rides into vomit machines. Oh my. You'll even see a lot of guest thought was saying the rides were really good value, and the park was really clean and tidy. So how do you get so many sick people in Roller Coaster Tycoon and a tidy park? By having first aid rooms, plenty of handymen, and lots of benches. Right outside the exit, I'd place benches for sick guests to recover on before moving on. After 1 year of playing the part of Hillpath Capital as best I could, that's where we started to see some interesting things happen. My cash pile skyrocketed from the high prices and the huge loan I took out. The most glaring change besides that was the change in guest attendance. I went from 1,751 guests to 1,342 guests. That's a 23% drop in attendance. In real life, that kind of drop would panic investors and everyone else. But in RCT2, it's not as consequential. The top 10 guest thoughts by September of Year 5 also changed dramatically. Look at this. I feel sick was still the number one thought since we still had the coasters operating, but the number declined by about 29 since we cut the throughput on the coasters. That meant fewer people were turning up sick in the same amount of time. Running out of cash was still one of the top thoughts, and it stayed there since prices were now so high. The biggest red flag, however, was the spike in the number of people who said, "I want to go home." This made me think of the reviews I've read for various businesses where the guests probably said, "Do not recommend," or "I will not return." Because once a guest gets this thought in their head in Roller Coaster Tycoon, nothing will stop them from heading for the exit except a free transport ride. We do have a transport ride in this scenario, but Hillpath wouldn't tolerate that being free of charge, since Crazy Castle doesn't allow you to charge for an admission fee.